creepy story, scary horror stories, wilderness horror encounter. A delivery driver in Oregon picked up one last order before ending his shift. The destination, an abandoned house, deep inside the wilderness. On the dusty package, a handwritten note in red ink, "Thank you for bringing me back." As he approached the crumbling front door, his phone lost all signal. No service, no GPS, just static. And that was only the beginning of his terrifying descent into a nightmare. Warning: this is one of those creepy wilderness stories that stays with you. If you thought delivery jobs were mundane, you might want to reconsider. This true scary story may blur the line between logic and the unexplainable. Viewer discretion is advised. The house before Ethan, a young delivery driver, looked like it was pulled straight from one of those creepy outdoor stories you find deep in Reddit forums. The wood was rotting windows, shattered wild vines clinging to the frame like veins on a corpse. He rang the doorbell. No answer, no footsteps, just the whispering wind threading through the dark forest. The same forest once linked to several scary wood stories involving hikers who never returned. He held the package tightly. No recipient name, just a printed address and a handwritten note in red ink. "Thank you for bringing me back." He stepped in. The old wooden door creaked open on its own, letting out a groan like the exhale of a dying thing. And once the door shut behind him without any wind or push, he felt the temperature drop. Dramatically, his phone had already lost signal, but now no apps would open. The flashlight flickered for a second and died completely. All that remained was the faint beam of light filtering in through a crack in the roof. Inside the house was dusty, abandoned, but disturbingly well organized. Plates were on the table. Teacups were half full. A vintage record player spun an eerie tune that looped endlessly like a cursed opening to every true creepy story he had read on Let's Read and Stories from Reddit. He set the package down on the table, ready to leave, but the door inexplicably wouldn't budge. Locked from the inside. Click. The package, still unopened, was now gaping open. Inside was a blood-stained VHS tape wrapped in muddy cloth. Scrawled on the tape, "Play me." Ethan wasn't superstitious, but he was a big fan of true horror stories and bizarre cases from Reddit horror forums. What scared him wasn't the tape, but the fact that there was an old CRT TV in the room, already wired and connected to a functioning VHS player, as if someone had been waiting for him to arrive. Against all logic, he inserted the tape. The screen flickered. Static. Then, a recording of a delivery man standing in the exact same spot as Ethan. The man opened the package, found the VHS, played it, then vanished. The final frame of the video froze. "Ethan, you're next." How could they know his name? Panic set in. He slammed against the doors, yelled. No response. Outside, just darkness and the endless hum of the wilderness, the same unrelenting backdrop of so many national park stories involving vanishing rangers and unsolved deaths. On the wall, a worn-out map had a red marker pin showing his current location. Next to it were newspaper clippings, images of other missing delivery drivers, campers, park rangers, and tourists, all linked to this area. None ever found. Words were scrawled along the wall in what looked like dried blood. They never left. They were brought back to feed it. Footsteps from the basement, dragging, shuffling, multiple sets, maybe not human. He crouched behind a chair, heart pounding. A cold, decaying hand gripped his ankle from the floorboards beneath him. He screamed. This wasn't a horror movie. This was reality, the kind featured in creepy park ranger stories where something ancient and unspeakable dwells in the wilderness, punishing anyone who dares enter. That night, Ethan was never seen again, and the package, it was sealed once more, shipped to a new address, another abandoned house, another unwilling delivery man, same note as always. Thank you for bringing me back. Ethan awoke in a dimly lit room devoid of windows, with only a flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. He couldn't recall how he arrived here, but the lingering fear remained palpable. The room was small, its walls adorned with faded photographs. As Ethan examined them, he recognized images of delivery drivers, hikers, and park rangers, all sharing the common fate of disappearing within this region. He recalled the horror stories he'd read on Reddit, tales of people vanishing without a trace in the deep woods. True creepy stories, creepy park ranger stories, and national park stories. A heavy iron door creaked open, revealing a man clad in an old park ranger uniform, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The man gazed at Ethan with a cold stare and said, "Welcome to the place no one wishes to enter, boy. You've brought it back and now you must pay the price." Ethan attempted to flee, but the door slammed shut. He was trapped with only the echoing whispers in his mind. "Thank you for bringing me back." The room Ethan was trapped in seemed to exist outside of time. The air felt thick, old, saturated with the smell of wet earth and decaying wood. The walls were scrawled with unknown symbols, some in dried blood, some in what looked like ash. Every night, Ethan experienced vivid visions, not dreams, of other people who'd vanished before him. Their stories mirrored those he had once casually browsed through on Reddit, tagging them as true creepy stories or scary horror stories for late-night reading. He saw Marlene, a young delivery girl who once entered the house and never came back. Her footage surfaced online as part of a viral Let's Not Meet thread, with chilling screenshots of her last known delivery timestamp and the grainy CCTV image of her vanishing into thin air near the forest. Another one, a park ranger named Douglas, had responded to reports of lights inside an abandoned lookout tower deep in the Oregon wilderness. He was never heard from again. Only his badge and belt were found weathered and covered in moss. His story was one of the most discussed in creepy park ranger stories on the internet. Ethan scrawled his thoughts on the walls with his own blood. They come from the dark patches of the woods, the ones light never touches. We are not the first. We won't be the last. Whispers, breathing, scratching. Every night something moved around the cabin, never seen, only heard. Once Ethan pressed his ear to the wooden panel. A whisper slid into his mind. "It's hungry, and you are next." Then the door creaked open. No footsteps, no figure, just a map on the floor, an old Forest Service map marked with red X's. Ethan's hands trembled as he traced the dots. Each one matched a wilderness story, a missing hiker, a delivery man, or a ranger. Stories spread across time, places, and people, yet all connected to the same spot. This place, he finally understood. The note, "Thank you for bringing me back," wasn't symbolic. It was literal. Each package delivered wasn't just a courier task. It was a ritual, a summoning, and the one summoned had no intention of returning alone. He followed the map, stepping out into the forest. No signal, no GPS, just the black woods and a thin trail lined with old ranger markers, like those mentioned in dozens of national park stories and creepy outdoors stories. On every marker was a fingernail, cracked, bloodied, as if those before had tried to claw their warnings into the wood, begging for rescue that never came. He began seeing them, the dead, the missing, standing in silence by the trees. Some carried parcels, others held ranger radios. They didn't blink, didn't breathe, but they watched, always watched. He was no longer reading scary true stories, he was inside one. Ethan stumbled through the underbrush, his breath ragged and shallow. Behind him, the old ranger cabin vanished into the dense fog, curling between the trees like fingers made of smoke. He had no idea how long he had been wandering, only that the woods were far deeper and far stranger than any map had ever suggested. This wasn't just wilderness, it was something else. It was alive. The trees groaned as though whispering secrets. The wind wasn't just wind, it carried voices, whispers, names. His name, Ethan. He spun around. No one. The isolation sank in. He was surrounded by nothing but forest. No trail, no GPS. His phone was dead. Just endless, suffocating wilderness. It was the kind of setting you'd read about in those obscure wilderness stories, passed around like modern folklore and creepy outdoor stories on obscure subreddits. This was no longer a delivery route. This was a true creepy story unfolding in real time. As he pressed deeper into the trees, strange things began to happen. First, there were the signs. Literally, wooden posts nailed into the trunks of trees, each marked with burned-in initials and dates. Most were decades old, some were recent. A few had a name, Marlene. He had seen that name before on one of the photos in the cabin, and again in a Reddit horror story that went viral years ago. A thread under Let's Not Meet recounting her strange disappearance in Oregon's Crater Lake region. But that post had been deleted. People said the original author vanished after uploading it. Next came the symbols. Not graffiti. Symbols like sigils or runes etched into rock bark and even bones. Bones. He stumbled across a deer carcass, its skull crushed and twisted unnaturally. The same symbols were carved into its ribs. Nearby, a rusty park ranger badge lay in the dirt. Ethan recognized the name D. Whitmore. It clicked. That was the missing ranger from one of those creepy park ranger stories. He'd read it late one night on a Let's Read YouTube channel buried under playlists of true scary stories and national park stories. They'd said the ranger chased a set of mysterious footprints off trail. His final radio transmission was one line. "It's not human." That was 20 years ago. No body was ever found. Until now. Then came the whispers again. Not in the air in his mind. At first soft, then intrusive. And they spoke in a language he didn't understand. Except one word repeated over and over, return. He couldn't tell if the forest wanted him to go back or go deeper. The night came fast, unnaturally fast. One blink and the light was gone, only the moon above. But when he looked up, the moon wasn't right. It pulsed shifting colors subtly, and then it blinked. Not the moon. An eye. Ethan ran. He found an old ranger station deep in the woods, something not listed on any recent maps. Overgrown vines crawling up its sides like veins. The air around it buzzed not with insects, but something like static. Every horror instinct screamed at him not to go in, but he had no choice. Inside was a desk, a typewriter, old coffee mugs fossilized with mold, and a corkboard. On it, dozens of missing persons reports, all hikers, campers, rangers, and delivery drivers from nearby towns. One of them his own, his photo printed and pinned, scribbled across it, package delivered, subject accepted. In that moment, Ethan realized he wasn't lost. He was processed. The station had a basement, of course it did, and he descended, flashlight flickering with each step. As he reached the bottom, his light swept across something impossible. Hundreds of parcels, all identical. Same brown wrapping, same red ink message. "Thank you for bringing me back." Each one oozed a dark, thick fluid. Something pulsed inside. They weren't packages. They were eggs. He stumbled back, tripping over a crate. Behind him, something moved. Not walked, slithered. It had too many limbs. It wore a ranger's hat, but it had no face. A grotesque amalgamation of every missing person who had ever entered the woods. One arm with Marlene's charm bracelet, another with a ranger's patch. It was the forest. It was the story, and it reached for him. He ran again. blindly, bruised and bleeding. Voices now howled in his head, fragments of posts from stories from Reddit, flashes of warnings, cautionary tales from creepy stories, threads, all real, all here. The deeper he went, the more the forest twisted. Tree trunks bent in impossible angles, the dirt breathed. Birds flew upside down. He reached a clearing with a fire pit surrounded by scary horror stories scratched into stone, real accounts. He saw the name Jonah K. and remembered the true story of the camper who vanished in Yosemite only to have his GoPro discovered years later, showing him walking in circles for 48 hours, even though the footage only lasted 6 minutes. Finally, he saw light, a modern flashlight held by someone. "You okay?" A voice, human. He ran toward it. It was a search and rescue officer with a real name, real gear, real hands. They pulled him into a jeep. "You're the fourth this week," the officer said. "All came out near dead from the same zone. That place isn't on any official map." Ethan, half-conscious, asked, "What is it?" The officer didn't answer, only looked at the forest. Not everything in the wilderness wants to stay forgotten. He passed out. In the hospital a week later, he woke to find a package at his bedside. Same wrapping, same note. "Thank you for bringing me back." The descent into darkness. Ethan's footsteps echoed as he ventured deeper into the forest, the canopy above thickening, allowing only slivers of moonlight to guide his path. The air grew colder, each breath visible in the chilling atmosphere. The forest seemed alive, whispering tales of those who had entered and never returned. He stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin, its wooden structure barely holding together. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with relics of the past, dusty furniture, faded photographs, and a journal lying on a table. The journal belonged to a park ranger named Whitmore, detailing encounters with unexplainable phenomena, strange lights, eerie sounds, and disappearances. Ethan's heart raced as he read about the Whispering Woods, a section of the forest where reality seemed to bend and time lost its meaning. The entries grew more frantic, ending abruptly with a final note: "They are watching. I must leave before they find me." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back of the cabin. Ethan turned his flashlight, flickering, revealing claw marks on the walls. The temperature dropped and a sense of dread enveloped him. He knew he wasn't alone. He fled the cabin, the forest now a maze of shadows and whispers. Every tree seemed to have eyes, every rustle a potential threat. He recalled stories from Reddit tales of hikers and campers who vanished without a trace in these very woods. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred. Ethan stumbled upon a clearing where an old church stood, its steeple reaching towards the sky. Inside, candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. An altar stood at the center with symbols etched into its surface. He recognized them from the journal symbols meant to ward off evil. As he approached, a voice echoed through the church, chanting in an unknown language. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and hooded. The figure spoke of an ancient entity bound to the forest, feeding on fear and despair. Ethan realized he was part of a ritual, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Determined to escape, he ran the forest, now a cacophony of screams and laughter. He remembered the stories of the final girl, the lone survivor in horror tales. He vowed to be that survivor. After what felt like hours, he emerged from the forest, collapsing onto a dirt road. A passing vehicle stopped and a woman stepped out, helping him into the car. She introduced herself as Marlene, a researcher studying local legends. As they drove away, Ethan recounted his experiences. Marlene listened, intently nodding. She revealed that the forest had a history of unexplained events, and many who entered never returned. She handed him a book titled True Horror Stories, filled with accounts eerily similar to his own. Ethan realized his ordeal was part of a larger tapestry of horror, a narrative that spanned generations. He vowed to share his story to warn others of the darkness that lurked within the Whispering Woods. Threads of the forgotten Ethan had survived, or at least he thought he had. The world outside the woods looked normal, too normal. The sky was the same color, the air smelled the same, cars honked, people smiled. But there was something beneath the surface, a ripple in the pattern. He sat in Marlene's office, a small space packed with books about folklore, paranormal phenomena, and first-hand journals from survivors of unexplainable events. The walls were pinned with clippings from local newspapers, printouts of stories from Reddit, and hand-drawn maps of wilderness zones around the Pacific Northwest. "This is bigger than just one forest," Marlene said, tapping a map. "Disappearances are clustered around certain hotspots, mostly old national parks, abandoned ranger stations, off-grid trails. It's like someone or something is watching these places, feeding off them." Ethan's eyes landed on a photo, black and white. A smiling park ranger from the 1940s. Same last name as the badge he found, Whitmore. He was the first documented case, Marlene explained. They found his journal in 1952. It's one of the earliest accounts of the forest whispering. Ethan flipped through the pages. Same phrases, same symbols, same voices. "It's not a place," he murmured. "It's a pattern, a design." He tried to go home, but home didn't feel real anymore. The lights flickered at night. The static on the TV whispered his name. Everywhere he went, he saw the same brown parcel, the one with the red ink message. "Thank you for bringing me back." But they weren't real. Or were they? He tried to sleep, but every time he did, he dreamed of the woods. Not as they were, but deeper, older, ancient. Sometimes in the dreams, he'd see people from those old creepy stories, people who had gone missing. Campers, hikers, other delivery drivers. They'd call out to him, beg him to return, to complete the delivery. Desperate, he joined an online forum deep in the corners of Reddit, a place not indexed by search engines, referred to only as our forgotten roots. It was a mix of analog horror enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and people who genuinely believed that some national parks weren't what they seemed. One pinned post read, "If you ever find a ranger station with a map that doesn't match reality, leave. You're not in the park, you're in its mouth." Another user shared a true creepy story about hearing voices in a thunderstorm that guided him deeper into a ravine. He came back 3 days later with no memory, only a note in his backpack. Subject returned. Ethan posted his story. It was removed in under 10 minutes. He received a DM that read, "They're watching now. It's too late." Soon after his apartment changed, he came home one night and found his living room covered in mud, the smell of moss, of pine. His television turned on by itself, displaying static, then a blurry image of the wilderness, the exact path he ran through weeks ago. Then came the audio tapes, unmarked, left on his doorstep. He played the first, a voice his own screaming, then whispering, then silence. The second tape was worse. It was a creepypasta-style analog horror recording, seemingly stitched together from old ranger transmissions, children singing nursery rhymes backwards, and what sounded like a heartbeat slowing down. He couldn't sleep after that, not just because of fear, because the forest was calling again. Chapter 5. The Second Delivery. Marlene was gone. No sign of forced entry. Her office ransacked. Books missing. Maps burned. On her desk, one thing left. A parcel. Same brown wrapping. Same red ink. "Thank you for bringing me back." Inside, not a package. A photograph. Ethan and Marlene standing near the edge of the woods, taken from deep within the trees. He didn't remember it being taken. Beneath the photo coordinates, he debated ignoring it. He didn't. The coordinates led to a national park in Montana. one long abandoned due to a series of mysterious accidents. An entire ranger team had gone missing there decades ago. The government sealed it off, claiming ecological damage. Locals whispered about it being cursed. One of the creepy outdoor stories often dismissed as urban legend. Ethan didn't care anymore. He drove for 2 days straight. The entrance was chained. He broke it open. What greeted him wasn't just wilderness. It was silence, heavy, absolute silence. No birds, no wind, no insects, just trees. Watching. He followed the trail. It got darker fast. Soon he needed his flashlight, then a flare. Eventually he reached a clearing. At the center, a stone altar. On it, rows and rows of parcels. Some old, rotting, others new. He recognized one. His. He stepped forward. The forest around him whispered hundreds of voices overlapping. Return. Complete. Become. A figure emerged from the trees. Not human. Wearing a uniform. A park ranger badge half buried in its flesh. Its face was everyone. Marlene, Whitmore, himself. It held out a parcel. This one's for you. He took it, hands trembling, opened it. Inside a mirror. His reflection blinked, but he hadn't. He screamed, but nothing came out. He dropped the parcel, stumbled backward. The trees leaned in. The air grew thick. And then, darkness. The loop. Ethan awoke not on the forest floor, but in a ranger station. Or at least, something pretending to be one. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically. The air smelled metallic. The windows were black, no reflection, no view, just void. He stood slowly. The desk in front of him was empty, save for a familiar object. A parcel, of course. He opened it. Inside a map, one he hadn't seen before. It depicted the national park in perfect detail, but layered on top were hand-sketched trails that didn't exist on any public records. One path was highlighted in red. The return route. In the corner, a note. They come through you. You are the vessel. He followed the hallway out of the station. Each door he passed was labeled Our True Creepy Stories, Our Scary Woods, Our Let's Not Meet, Our Wilderness Archive. Each door emitted faint static and distant whispers. It wasn't just a building. It was a network, a literal architecture built from the bones of every creepy story ever shared online. A repository of human fear. Ethan opened one. It was pitch black inside. A projection began to play on the far wall. Grainy VHS footage of a young girl in a yellow raincoat walking through the woods. It looked old, analog horror style. Suddenly she turned to face the camera. "You shouldn't be watching this," she said, "but you already are." And so it begins again. He backed away and shut the door. More rooms, more doors. Each a story, each a trap. He found one room filled with park ranger uniforms, each tagged with names he recognized. Names from Reddit posts, news clippings, and Let's Read podcasts. Each with a cause of death, scribbled on duct tape. Disappeared, never recovered. Found hanging in fire tower. Walked into lake, never came out. Ethan realized something chilling. They weren't stories. They were warnings. Then he found a final hallway longer than it should have been. Walls pulsing gently like the lungs of some great beast. At the end, a door burned into the wood. The author. He opened it. Inside a room of mirrors, but not reflecting him. Each mirror played a scene. In one, he was delivering the package again. In another, he was Marlene taking notes in her office. In another, he was Whitmore wandering the woods with a broken radio. Every version ended the same way, "Thank you for bringing me back." A voice filled the room. Not loud, not human. "You've read our stories, now you are one." The mirrors shattered, behind them a mass. Not flesh, not bone, it looked like paper. Millions of pages, stories, every story ever told. Torn, chewed, absorbed. He reached toward it, unable to stop himself. When his fingers touched the pages, they moved, wrapped around him, pulled him in. The upload. He woke up again. Not in the ranger station, not in the woods, at home, at his desk, computer, glowing. A new file on his desktop, My Story, True Creepy Story.txt. He opened it. It was everything, every moment, every detail, written perfectly. But he hadn't written it. At the end, thank you for uploading. Confused, he went online. His story was already posted on multiple forums. Our creepypasta, our no sleep, our true horror stories. Thousands of upvotes. People asking if it was real. Others claiming they had the same dream. Then new messages, I saw this thing too. Wait, are you the guy with the parcel? This happened to me. Days passed, then weeks. He started to forget things. First his passwords, then his sister's birthday, then his own name. Every night he dreamed of forests, ranger cabins, parcels, until one night he woke up in the woods, again, a flashlight in one hand, a parcel in the other. Same red message. Thank you for bringing me back. Final stories without end years. Later, an anonymous Redditor posted this in our Let's Not Meet. I work for a parcel delivery service. Got a weird job last week. No name, no sender, no return address. Just coordinates deep in a national park that's been closed for decades. Decided to look it up online, couldn't find anything except an archived story on our True Creepy Stories. The weird part, it was written by a guy named Ethan, same name as me. Ethan no longer knew how long he had been walking or who he was really. Some nights he remembered his name. Others he was just the guy with the parcel. The forest no longer scared him, it accepted him. Trees parted when he approached. Shadows didn't bother to hide. The wilderness had teeth, yes, but he had become one of them. He had returned, again, and again, and again. On the final night, something changed. A figure approached him from the trees. Not a monster, a man, wearing a fresh delivery uniform, confused, sweaty, clutching a parcel. I was told to drop this here, the man said. Ethan looked at the package. Same wrapping, same red message, same weight. He nodded, took it from the man's hands. You made the delivery, Ethan said. The man looked at him. What now? Ethan smiled, soft and empty. You stay, and I leave. But he didn't. Not really. He watched the man vanish into the woods' footsteps, already fading. He looked down at the parcel. This one didn't have a note. Just a name. Ethan Reed returned. He blinked, and for the first time in years he felt it. Panic. Back in town, weeks passed. A Reddit thread appeared on our True Creepy Stories titled, My Brother Disappeared Delivering a Weird Package to an Old Trail in Montana. We found his phone. The only thing on it was a video. The video was grainy, but the voice was clear. It was Ethan, whispering into the camera. If you're seeing this, don't accept it. Don't deliver it. Don't open the parcel. It's not a thing. It's a door. And every time you open it, you're letting something out. Or something in. I don't know anymore. Just don't. The video glitched, then looped. 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 Epilogue. In a quiet apartment in Portland, Oregon, a young woman named Jill browsed horror subreddits late one night. She clicked a video link titled True Horror Story, Returned Delivery Full Analog Cut. As the video loaded, her phone buzzed. A delivery notification. She blinked. She hadn't ordered anything. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. No one. Just a brown parcel on the welcome mat. She picked it up. No name, no sender. Only a note. Thank you for bringing me back. She smiled nervously, went inside, closed the door. Behind her, a whisper loop complete. Next one begins.